Good morning, Morai v'Rabotai, Baruchim Habayim. We are continuing on Masechet Succah, and we are on top of Daf Mem Aleph, Amud Aleph, 3 lines down from the top of the Amud. Today's Amud is being learned as a Zechut Refuah Shalema for Michael ben Nahid, for Rachel Simcha bat Nahid, for Esther Bracha bat Chaya, for Rabbi Avraham ben Tajgol, Betoch Shar Kol Choli Yisrael, that should have Refuah Shalema Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. His Amud have been dedicated also by Shei family, Dayan family, Kohen family. Should be an ultimate zechut for all their mishpachot. Amen. So we spent the majority of yesterday's Amud on the discussion, the machloket between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan, as to what exactly are the parameters of chilul when you have fruit of Shvi'it, you have a etrog of Shvi'it, you have any fruit of Shvi'it for that matter. What exactly is the process of making it not Kodesh? Do you have to purchase and sell? Or can you just sit like Hekdesh and transfer the Kedusha from one onto other? So Rabbi Elazar said that it has to be only through sale, and Rabbi Yochanan said you could do either or. This is again the top of Mem Amud Bet. This is the discussion that we spent the majority of the daf yesterday on. Amar Rabbi Elazar, en shvid mitchalelet ela derech mekach. Rabbi Elazar holds that it's only through sale and financial transactions that you could do it. And Rabbi Yochanan says, ben derech mekach, ben derech chilul. You could either be transacting, selling and buying, or it could be you sitting there and transferring the kedusha from one item to another. Now, Rabbi Elazar brought a raya, a proof for his shita from the juxtaposition of the psukim that talk about Shvi'it, that says, B'shnat hayovel azot tashuvu ish el mishpachto, el achuzato, and immediately afterwards it says, V'chi timkeru memkar la'amitecha o kalom yad amitecha. You see that the Shvi'it works through V'chi timkeru memkar o kalom yad amitecha. It's selling and buying that transfers the kedusha, but you can't do it outside of the parameters of a transactional relationship. And Rabbi Yochanan says no. He learns from a pasuk also. He says when the pasuk says ki kodesh hi lachem, when it says it's kadosh, it means that it's just like hekdesh. Just like hekdesh, I could either sell it and thereby transfer the kedusha. You go to a gizbar of the Beit HaMikdash, you want the diamond ring, you pay for it. At that moment, it already changes, the kedusha changes from the ring into the money that I paid. Now the money belongs to Beit HaMikdash, it's hekdesh, and the ring is chulin, I could use it. Or I could have a hekdesh and say, okay, this and that equivalent of the money, and there's no second party involved, I'm doing it myself. So just like hekdesh, kodesh is like that, says Rabbi Yochanan, Shvi'it is also like that. Ki yovel hi kodesh. Just like kodesh, ma kodesh, ben derech mekach, ben derech kilul, af shvit, ben derech mekach, ben derech. This is the basic machloket that we had. Then we contrasted each one of them, how they deal with the other ones. Raya and the Gemara ended up saying, you know what? We have a proof from a Braita for Rabbi Elazar, a proof from a Braita for Rabbi Yochanan. What was the proof from the Braita for Rabbi Elazar? Because you have a Braita that discusses when a person, 2 halachot, that when a person buys things with the money of Shvi'it, the last one, even if you do a few transactions back to back, the last one always contains Kedushat Shvi'it, and also we learned that the fruit of the Shvi'it itself always stays in its Kedusha. So therefore, the example of the Braita was, if you took Perot Shvi'it, you sold it, right, and you transacted with somebody, and you bought an item, right? You bought a pound of meat, and then you went and you gave the meat and you took fish, and then you gave the fish, you took wine, you gave the wine, you got oil. The oil has Kedushat Shvi'it. even though that you went 5 steps ahead, the oil has Kedushat Shvi'it, and the fruit itself, the original Perot Shvi'it, also has Kedushat Shvi'it, right? But the language throughout the entire Braita, this is the key, the language throughout the entire Braita is lakach, right? You purchased. Why do you have to say purchased? Unless you could only transfer the Kedusha through purchasing. So that pretty much sounds like Rabbi Elazar. So that was the raya for Rabbi Elazar. You see, the Braita uses only transactions for transfer of Kedusha. You can't just sit there with one party, not with the second party. Just sit there and say, okay, this meat that I bought with Perot Shvi'it, now the Kedusha should go on the fish. I want to eat the meat without Kedusha Shvi'it. I want to freeze the meat and eat it after Shata Biur. That's the sound of that Braita. So that was the raya for Rabbi. And then we had the raya for Rabbi Yochanan. And that the Gemara brought from a Braita that says both Maaser Sheni and Shvi'it, Echad Shvi'it ve'echad Maaser Sheni, this is again 4 lines up from the bottom of Mem Amud Bet, Mitchalelin, and that's the key word, Mitchalelin al be'ema chaya ve'of. They could become mechulal. It sounds like you could take it and say, okay, this kedusha of this should be mechulal on that, and you're good to go. It's the sound of that. So therefore you have a Braita indicating like Rabbi Elazar, a Braita indicating like Rabbi Yochanan, and the one now is going to be dealing with this, continuing on this discussion, getting it to a maskana, and that's why we kind of like had a quick synopsis of this the past few minutes. So now let's take a look to see what Rav Ashi does with this. Rav Ashi says no. The machloket that we have between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan is only in Peri Rishon, in the first transaction, in the first transfer of Kedusha. But after that, according to everyone, nobody disagrees that you could do either through sales or through a basic regular chilul, you sitting in your dining room and doing the chilul. That's what Rav Ashi says. Let's read it inside. 3rd line down from the top of Memarav Amud. Aleph, Amar Rav Ashi. Machloket bePeri Rishon. Machloket Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan. Which Rabbi Elazar holds you could only do it through sales, through transaction. And Rabbi Yochanan holds you could do it regular chilul as well. It's only bePeri Rishon. It's only with the actual fruit of Shvi'it. That which you took from the tree is Perot Shvi'it. The first transfer of Kedusha, that is machloket that you have between Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says you could only sell it. You can't take the fruits from your garden and take it inside and say this will be mechulal on this. You can't do that. You have to sell it. And Rabbi Yochanan says you could do it whatever you want. Aval bePeri Sheni, but from the second one and on, divrei hakol ben derech mekach ben derech chilul. You could do whatever you want. Even according to Rabbi Elazar, you could do whatever you want. Now, what's the obvious question on this? The obvious question is, we just said a minute ago that there is a Braita that supports Rabbi Elazar. You remember that? The guy that goes and sells the fruit, gets meat, gives the meat, gets fish, right? And lakach, the verbiage of throughout the whole Braita is lakach. The Gemara says that's not a kasha, because that would be a question on this, right? It seems from that Braita that not only the fruit, the first fruit, but even the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth, they all have to be lakach through mekach umemkar through transaction. The Gemara says don't ask that because that's not the question. Listen to what the Gemara says. V'hate katari lakach, this that we said in the Braita lakach, I did the Tana Resha lakach. It's really how the Braitas operate. Braitas and Mishnayot, they use a poetic, consistent language for people to be able to hold their mind on it. Therefore, if you used a certain verbiage in the beginning, you kind of continue with that verb throughout the Mishnah, throughout the Braita. And here, the very first one that the Braita uses, lakach, it's very davka, right? Because remember, the first one, this Braita is a support for Rabbi Elazar. And Rabbi Elazar holds that the first fruit of Shvi'it they take off your tree, you could only transfer the kedusha by sales. So lakach is davka in the beginning of that braita. When the braita says that you gave the fruit and you took a pound of meat, that is only through lakach. But once you use lakach in the beginning, the braita uses the verbiage of lakach throughout. Lakach this, lakach that, but doesn't mean lakach. You could actually sit in your dining room and say, okay, this pound of meat that I got should be mechulal on the fish that I already have in my freezer, and then do the transfer of the kedusha. I did the Tana Resha Lakach, Tana Nami Sefa Lakach. So says the Gemara, Itve Ravina Rabashi. Ravina asked Rabashi, Mi sheyesh lo sela shel shvi'it. A person that has sela shel shvi'it, he has a coin of shvi'it. This is a question in this. In other words, remember that we said the first one could only be through Mekach u'Memkar, according to Rabbi Lazar, and it could be both according to Rabbi Yochanan. The machloket is in the first fruit of Shvi'it, machloket Rabbi Lazar, but afterwards you could do whatever you want. Now the Gemara says you can't say that, because I will bring you an example from the second fruit, right? Here is an example in the Braita. If a person is holding a coin of shvit, how do you have a coin of shvit? Coins don't grow from the ground, right? So that's not the fruit. So this is by definition the second step, right? This is perot sheni. This is not peri rishon, this is peri sheni, right? So you have a coin with kedushat shvit in your hand. Ubikesh likach bo chaluk. You want to buy a shirt. Can you buy a shirt from money of Shvi'it? No, you can't. Why not? Take a look at Rashi. Take a quick look at Rashi. Says Rashi, "Ubikesh likach lo chaluk ve'en lo yachol." You can't do that. Why? The Torah amra leochla betoch hazman. When it says leochla, you have to be eating it betoch hazman during the course of the time that you're allowed to until zman habiur. And therefore, this shirt you can stay forever, right? It's not edibles. Edibles is one thing. Well, once you're buying objects, then that becomes very questionable with kedushat shvit. So, how do you deal with it? I need a shirt. I have a coin of shvit, right? Which is perot sheni, right? I had my fruit of shvit that I sold, and I got the money. Now the money has kedusha, but for Yom Tov I need shirt. I don't need anything else. So how can I do that with ma'ot of shvit? Listen to the genius idea of the Braita. Says the Gemara. This is like a halachic money laundering. Says the Gemara. This is what you do. Ketzad yaseh. What do you do? Yelech etzel cherman. You go to the store, right? Haragil etzlo. That knows you, trusts you. You go to him. Ve'omer lo ten li besela perot. Say, I need fruits. Give me a sela worth of fruits. Fine, he gives you. You have the fruits in your hand. Ve'notel lo ve'chozer ve'omer lo hare perot halalu netunim lecha b'matana. He says, I love you so much. I want to give you this fruit b'matana. I'm giving you a gift, right? Now, the fact that these fruit have the halacha of shvi'it, fine, the chermani is okay with that. So I have matana for you. Here is matana. Ve'omer, and the chermani says, thank you so much. Hazaku baruch. And then before the guy turns around to leave, he says, by the way, I have this sela matana for you for your birthday, right? Here it says as a matana. Now, what is this sela? Nothing. The fruits are, again, I'm not buying anything. I gave him a matana. Hazaku baruch. He's giving me a matana. This sela no longer has kedushat shvit. The fruits have it now. He is stuck with whatever he has to deal with. But I have my sela, and my sela I could buy a shirt with, no problem. Now you understand why it has to be a chermani haragil etzlo. Right? Somebody that trusts you, you like him, he likes you, he's willing to do this. Because now he has to deal with kedushat shvit, and you're off the hook. You could go buy a shirt with this. Okay? Halacha sela zu b'matana. And this fellow now could buy with this seller whatever he wants. So says the Gemara, listen to this. Over here, the seller that has kedusha is perisheni, right? It's perisheni. And what can you do with it? Can I sit in my house and say, you know what? The kedusha of this should go on my fruits here, and then I have my seller. No, you can't do that. You have to go to the Hanvani to do it. It has to be derech mekach umemkar. Why? Why can't I just sit in my kitchen and do the thing on my fruits in my fridge? And make this tahor, make the seller non-holy afterwards. You see that you can't do it. So who is this? Obviously, it's Rabbi Elazar. But you see that you told me a minute ago that the machloket Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan is only by fruit, the peri rishon, the fruit itself. The fruit that I take off the tree for Shvi'it, that's the machloket. But afterwards, peri sheni, you could do whatever you want according to everybody. Even Rabbi Elazar would agree that you could do chilul. That's what we said a minute ago. That doesn't shtim with this, doesn't fit with this. Because this obviously is Rabbi Elazar, and Rabbi Elazar says, no, you have to schlep to the Chenvani, go find the Chenvani that's willing to do this for you. You can't do it in your kitchen. So you see clearly that by peri sheni, it's still machloket between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan, whether or not you need to transact, or can you do it yourself at home, doing a chilul, transferring kedusha from one thing to another. So says the Gemara, this is peri sheni, v'katari derech memkar in, and the Braita is saying only derech mekach in, derech chilul lo. Ela, so we're going to retract what we said before and switch it to Rav Ashi. Really, what he said is like this. And Amar Rav Ashi, what Rav Ashi in reality said is not what we said before, is a little bit notch higher than that. Machloket beperi sheni. Machloket Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan is by peri sheni. But by peri rishon, aval beperi rishon, divrei hakol derech mekach, in derech chilul lo. Even Rabbi Yochanan agrees. Even Rabbi Yochanan agrees that by the fruit itself, there is nobody that disagrees. That when you take the fruit off of your tree on Shvi'it, the only way that you could transfer the kedusha to something else is when you transact with it. You can't just sit in your dining room and do it on your own. By peri rishon, it's derech mekach in, derech chilul lo. Now, what's the question on that? Remember, again, a few minutes ago we said, 4 lines up from the bottom of the Amud, on Mem, Amud Bet, the raya, the proof that we had, the support that we had for Rabbi Yochanan was from this Braita that said that whether it is Tanya Kvated Rabbi Yochanan, Echad Shvi'it ve'echad Maaser Sheni, mitchalelin al be'ema chaya ve'of. That whether it is Shvi'it or Maaser Sheni, it's mitchalel, which it sounds like the Shvi'it itself, the fruits of Shvi'it itself, you could be mitchalel, you could sit in the dining room and do chilul on it without the mekach umemka. That was the whole raya. And that sounds like, when it says Shvi'it, it means perot Shvi'it. It means the actual fruits of Shvi'it, which is what? Peri Rishon. That would be the sound of that Braita. The Gemara says, don't ask that, because when the Braita there says Shvi'it, clearly is not talking about the actual fruit of Shvi'it. And I'll prove it to you, says the Gemara. It is talking about the money of Shvi'it, which is peri sheni. How do I prove that to you? Let's see, this is a genius Gemara. Let's take a look. Says the Gemara, V'had katani echad Shvi'it v'echad maaser sheni. This that we learned the Braita on the bottom of Mem Amud Bet, that whether it is Shvi'it or Maaser Sheni, it's mitchalelin. They could be mitchalel on be'ema chaya ve'of, on other animals. They could take their place in kedusha. My Shvi'it, what does Shvi'it mean? Deme Shvit is talking about the money that you took for Shvit when you transacted. So we're still sticking to our guns. The Rav Ashi said, both Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar say that the fruit itself you could only sell. You could only transact and transfer the Kedusha like that, but not through Chilul. And this Braita is talking about the money of Shvit, that you could take the money of Shvit and put it on animals and ofot and whatever it is that you want to buy. The ilote machi, and this is the proof. How do I know? How do I know that that Braita is talking about the money of Shvi'it, not the actual fruit? Because the Braita says, the ilote mahachi maaser mamash. When the Braita says, look at the lashon of the Braita. The Braita says, echad Shvi'it ve'echad maaser sheni. Doesn't make a difference whether it's Shvi'it or maaser sheni. You could be mitchalel. Right? So if you tell me that Shvit is Shvit Mamash, it's actual fruit of Shvit, then when you say Maaser Sheni, also means Maaser Sheni Mamash. That means the grain of Maaser Sheni that you have. Now I ask you a question, right? Chachamim and Chukamim around this big table, right? You have Maaser Sheni. Can I take my Maaser Sheni and be Mechalel the Maaser Sheni on animals? I have a cow here. I have enough pounds of wheat Maaser Sheni here. I'll say, okay, the Kedusha of this Maaser Sheni should go on this cow. Can I do that? Normally, with Hekdesh, you can. Maaser Sheni is the one exception that you cannot. Why? How do we know that? This is a different drasha in a different place, in a different Gemara, that the Pasuk says, Ve'sarta ha'kesef be'yadecha. We learn from that you need surat hakesef. You need a real matbea sheyesh alav tzura. You can only and only transfer the kedusha of Maaser Sheni on money. That's it, and not just any money. You can't even take a piece of gold or a piece of silver, or even for that matter, a matbea, an old coin that has been ruined. You can't see the tzura. It has to be a fresh, nice, coin that you have, the two, everything's, that's the only thing you could, and therefore this Braita it will be senseless. If you say that you're talking about Maaser Sheni Mamash, of course you cannot be Mechalel Maaser Sheni on an animal. You could only be Mechalel Maaser Sheni on Kesef, on a Matbea, on a coin. So therefore it's Muchach, it's clear that when the Braita says Maaser Sheni, you're being mechalel on an animal, we're not talking about actual Maaser Sheni grains. We're talking about the money that you took from Maaser Sheni, right? In other words, you did the chilul already on the money, on the coin that has tzura. Now you take this money and you want to transfer the kedusha of that on an animal, on a be'emah haya ve'of. So just like here is the money of Maaser Sheni, by Shvi'it is also the money of Shvi'it. So don't be bothered with this Braita that sounds like you could take Shvi'it and be mechalel in your kitchen on something else. And we just said that even Rabbi Yochanan agrees that the first Peri Rishon you could only do through transactions, because this Braita is not talking about Peri Rishon. Peri Rishon, Taka, even according to Rabbi Yochanan, you could only transact with to transfer the Kedusha. This Braita is talking about Peri Sheni. It's talking about the money of the kesef of Maaser, of Shvi'it rather, and therefore we could do it through Chilul. You could sit in your kitchen and say, okay, this money that I have for Shvi'it, the Kedusha should be chal on the fruits I have in my fridge, and the money now is chulin. So the maskana of the Gemara now is, both Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar agree that the actual fruits of Shvi'it, the only way you could transfer their Kedusha on something else is through transacting, through sales. When you sell it, now the Kedusha is chal on the money, but after that, says Rav Ashi, after that first stage, you could now say, okay, for this goes on that goes on that. You could sit with, do the math in your kitchen, say, okay, this pound of meat goes on the fish goes on the wine goes on the oil. You could play with it like that on your own without transactions, but the first one has to be through transactions. So that's Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Elazar will tell you that not only the first one has to be through transactions, but even the second one has to be through transactions as well. You can't just do chilul on your own, which now would make obviously the braita of lakach lakach more realistic. Yes.
And also all agree still that the original fruit still maintains its.
Correct. No, that stays the same. Good question. In other words, the fruit of Shvi'it still maintains its kedusha. That we know. But the thing also transfers on the second one as well.
How is that different than Sheni, the Master Sheni? You said you can't do it at all.
No, so Masechet Sheni has its specific halacha that you could only be mechalel on a certain type of coin. By Shvi'it, doesn't have to be necessarily money. You could transact with other things as well, like an exchange transaction, right? That's also kinyan chalipin. You have such a thing. Like, I give you this, you give me that, and that's a transaction between me and you. That's also mekach umemka. Now, next Mishnah is a fantastic Mishnah. It says the Mishnah berishonaya lulav nital b'mikdash shivah b'mina yom echad. In the beginning, the time of the Bet HaMikdash, we spoke about this number of times already, that the lulav hadas v'arava letrog the arba minim was taken by people outside of the area of the Bet HaMikdash only the first day. Only the first day. Only in the Makom HaMikdash it would be the 7 days. Because again, it says, Ulkachtem b'yom harishon peri etz adar kapot timarim ve'anaf etz avod ve'arve nachal. Right? B'yom harishon. Ulkachtem. But then it says, Usmachtem lifnei Hashem Elokechem shivat yamim. When you're lifnei Hashem, the Makom HaMikdash, it's shivat yamim. Right? So that's how we explained it before. So the Mishnah says that that's in the time of the Bet HaMikdash. Correct. But Rishonah, when we had the Bet HaMikdash, Ha'elulav Nitan BeMikdash, Shiv'ah, in the Mikdash it was 7 days. Ube Medina, in the rest of the country, would be Yom Echad. Mi shecharav Bet HaMikdash. From the day that Bet HaMikdash got destroyed. Now remember, who was the Nasi during the Churban? We have this, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the Nasi. We have the whole Gemara in Masechet Gitin, how his nephew was the head of Biryonim. They burnt all the storages of 21 years worth of storage, of wood, of oil, of grain. They wanted to force people to go fight the Romans. That was their hashkafa, they're hot-headed young people, they wanted to go to war, and they burnt the internal storage houses, and it became famine. It was horrible, right? And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai snuck out to speak to the future Caesar, and we know the story, right? So he was the one that experienced, again, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai lived a very blessed life, very, very blessed life. He lived 120 years. He was the leader of Klal Yisrael for 40 years. And those the hardest moments for Klal Yisrael, right? By the way, don't judge a book by its cover. We actually obviously learned tremendous things about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai over here in our Masechta and Kafchet, right? How he didn't leave anything that he didn't know, and he was such a Baal Midot. He opened the door for his students even, and so yeah, it was a tremendous thing. But the Gemara also said that he was the youngest, the least significant students of Hillel, right? Out of the 80 students. And who became the Nasi? Him. You never know who is destined for greatness in that way. So he was the great leader and Nasi of Klal Yisrael in the time of the Churban, and he made certain takanot zecher lemikdash. He wanted us to live with the memory and the mindset of Mikdash, Machari Bana Mikdash. Tomorrow the Mikdash is going to be built, and that's something that we live with. There's a whole Siman in Shulchan Aruch about the things that we must do in order to remember the Bet HaMikdash. This is Siman Taf Kuf Samech in Orach Chaim that discusses all of the things. Like, when you have Chatan and Kala, you put the crown of Chatan and Kala will be different because of this. Or when you have a fancy seudah, a fancy party, you leave a ama al ama empty in the middle of the table right? The breaking of the glass, of course, with Gemara and Tosafot in Masechet Brachot Daf Lamed Aleph, and the fact that we don't listen to music in the time of Qurban. Now there's a different story why people find leniencies for that. But the Maseh, in Seif Gimel over there, Maran says that even music we don't listen because we want to remember Beit HaMikdash. Now this whole notion of remembering Beit HaMikdash in that way started really as an official takana over here in our Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Mishacharav Beit HaMikdash, from the day that Beit HaMikdash got destroyed, Hitkin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he instituted, She'eh lulav nitam b'medina shiva, zecher lemikdash, that lulav should be taken in the entire country, not just the Makom HaMikdash, 7 days. It should be taken every single day. What we take it every single day, we say bracha every single day. Where does that come from? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. That's where it comes from. V'she'eh yom hanaf kulo asur, and this, the yom hanaf should be entirely asur. What does that mean? Yom hanaf? That means Yom hanaf is halafat korban haomer. Traditionally speaking, and tomorrow we're going to start explaining this a little bit more in depth. There was a korban that would make it mutar for you to eat tevuah chadasha. The fresh, the whole chadash yashan comes from here, right? That there was midoraita. There is a mitzvah to keep away from tevuah chadasha, from the fresh produce that has been planted after the previous Pesach. You cannot eat that until the second day of Pesach, which is Tetzayin Benisan of the next year. And they would bring this Korban Omer, and that would be Matir. That's the Tetzayin Benisan is called Yom Hanaf. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai made a stringency that Yom Hanaf, the Tetzayin, the day of Tetzayin Benisan, the entire day should be Asur, right, to eat from the new produce from Chadash until the nightfall, the reason of which we will discuss with Zrat Hashem in the next shiur.